By the late 18th century, the Maratha Empire had emerged as the paramount power in India. Having filled the vacuum left by the declining Mughals, their territories stretched across the subcontinent, forming the only indigenous force capable of halting the expansion of the British East India Company. This empire functioned as a hub-and-spoke confederacy. At the center sat the Peshwa in Pune, acting as the prime minister and nominal head of four powerful regional chiefs: the Gayakwad, the Scindia, the Holkar, and the Bhonsle. However, this unity was surface level. Following a catastrophic defeat at the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, the central authority of the Peshwa withered, and the confederacy devolved into a collection of rival states. These chiefs frequently prioritized their own regional borders over the empire's security, routinely withholding military support from one another during crises to ensure no single leader gained too much influence. This structural fragmentation meant that long before a British soldier stepped onto the battlefield, the Marathas were already struggling against a leadership model that incentivized internal competition over collective survival. The political friction was compounded by a lack of a stable economic policy. Unlike the British, who were building a global trade network, the Maratha states did not develop consistent manufacturing or production-based revenue streams. Instead, their financial model relied on chowth, an extortion-based tax system. To fund their massive standing armies, the Marathas relied on constant raiding of neighboring territories to extract tribute. As this flowchart shows, it was a closed loop. They needed a large military to collect taxes, and they needed those taxes to maintain the military. When external territories were exhausted or successfully defended, the Maratha chiefs began turning inward. They crossed each other's borders to plunder the very lands they were supposed to be allied with, effectively treating their own confederacy as a target for revenue. By the turn of the 19th century, the Marathas had built a predatory economic engine that required them to cannibalize their own empire to remain solvent. The British authorities in Bombay recognized these internal fractures early on. In 1775, they attempted to exploit a succession dispute between the infant Peshwa Madhavrao II and his uncle Raghunath Rao, triggering the First Anglo-Maratha War. But the British encountered a rare moment of Maratha solidarity. A statesman named Nana Fadnavis took control of the administration, managed the egos of the various chiefs, and forced the Confederacy to present a unified military front against the East India Company. Because they remained united, the Marathas fought the British to a stalemate. The resulting Treaty of Salbai in 1782 forced the British to recognize the Peshwa's authority and pause their expansion into the Deccan for 20 years. That era of stability ended in 1800 with the death of Nana Fadnavis. The leadership fell to the incompetent Peshwa Bajirao II, whose poor diplomacy reignited the civil war between the Scindia and Holkar factions. Without a single diplomat capable of mediating between the chiefs, the Marathas transformed from a formidable military bloc into a collection of warring provinces, precisely when the British were preparing to strike again. After his forces were defeated by the Holkars at the gates of Pune, Peshwa Bajirao II fled his own capital. Seeking to reclaim his power, he sought refuge with the British at Bassein. There, in 1802, he signed the Treaty of Bassein, a document that effectively traded Maratha independence for British protection. This was the subsidiary alliance system in action. As shown here, the British provided a standing army to protect the Peshwa, but the cost was absolute sovereignty. The Marathas were forced to pay for the very troops that occupied them, and were barred from negotiating with any other power with British permission. The other Maratha chiefs, the Scindia and the Bhonsle, viewed the treaty as an insult to their national honor and mobilized for the Second Anglo-Maratha War to reverse the surrender. However, the alliance was hollow. The Holkars remained aloof, refusing to join the fight, allowing British commander Arthur Wellesley to engage the Scindia and Bhonsle armies without facing the full might of the Maratha Confederacy. Following the battles of Assaye and Argawan, the defeated chiefs were forced into their own subsidiary treaties. Through the settlements of Dayagan and Surji Arjangawan, the Marathas surrendered massive territories between the Ganges and the Jamuna, losing their most strategic defensive buffers. The British had successfully weaponized the Marathas' internal betrayals, using the legal framework of treaties to dismantle the empire's borders and strip away its diplomatic freedom. By 1817, the Maratha power was a shadow of its former self. The British used the raids of the Pindaris, irregular mercenaries who had once served the Marathas, as a pretext to launch a final, massive military sweep across central India. Realizing he was trapped in the subsidiary system he helped create, Peshwa Bajirao II made a belated attempt at rebellion, rallying the Holkar and Bhonsle chiefs for one last stand against British control, but the effort was uncoordinated and underfunded. At the Battle of Khadki, the British military's superior discipline and modernized artillery easily broke the Maratha lines, leading to the rapid surrender of the Peshwa. The collapse of the Maratha resistance at Khadki was the culmination of decades of decay. The internal rivalries and the lack of a sustainable state economy had hollowed out their military capacity long before the final campaign began. Following the defeat, the British formally abolished the title of Peshwa. Bajirao II was formally stripped of his authority and sent into permanent exile in Bithur on a government pension. Most of the Peshwa's dominions were annexed into the Bombay Presidency. The remaining Maratha chiefs were reduced to the status of feudatories, their states surviving only as princely dependencies under the watchful eye of British residents. The fall of the Maratha Confederacy removed the final indigenous barrier to British paramountcy in India. With their most significant rival dismantled by its own internal divisions, the British East India Company secured an uncontested path to colonial rule over the entire subcontinent.